for it to go one way or the other in that sense. But I guess I'll start by asking you a question, which is why you disagree with the proposition, essentially.
Sure. Yeah. So let's talk about the proposition really quick, just to make sure that the audience is totally in on it. So the proposition specifically was philosophy is obsolete to science in the pursuit of objective truth. And you went on to clarify that philosophy is inferior in the sense that it has been surpassed by science in that sense, but it is not entirely useless. So the reason that I disagree with this proposition is that it's on par. I think the best analogy for this would be that it's on par with saying that computer code is obsolete because we have computers, and that proposition at its face doesn't make sense to me. The sciences require philosophy in order to function. My In my view, philosophy requires, or rather, science requires that several assumptions, including philosophical assumptions, in order to operate, including mathematical assumptions, which I see as the philosophy centered around logic applied to definitional abstracts numbers. Science relies on these things. Science can't escape these things. And so calling them obsolete, it's like calling the foundation of your house obsolete. It just doesn't make sense to me. Further, there's a number of objective truths that I don't think science can speak to. I can give a few, but uh, for instance, science can't answer what the right thing to do is. Science can't tell you why art is beautiful specifically, or more accurately, what is beauty. Um, Science can't tell you about when to create a new scientific discipline. Science doesn't tell you how to do a lot of these things. Science can't tell you how to measure something accurately. We need to have other justifications for measurements. And when measurements in the scientific method change over time, or when we refine our methods, science doesn't even inform us on that. Science needs philosophy to guide it. And so it seems odd to try to remove philosophy from scientific empiricism, in my view, because empiricism is a philosophy anyway. So again, it's very strange, and I think the proposition is very close to being self defeating. And we can go on, but that's basically the crux of my argument here.
Okay, so science, you see science as based in philosophy, and I thought you would see it that way because a lot of people do see it that way, but in reality, science, I would say, is more derived from philosophy than actually based in it. Like, you don't necessarily need to philosophize in order to perform science. In order to utilize scientific methodology, you don't actually need to believe even in like the underlying assumptions of science. And the reason why you don't need to believe that is because as long as something is true within the context, objectively true within the context that you're claiming it's objectively true, then it's objectively true. For example, if I place a cup on the table and we're in a simulation, the fact that the cup is a simulation, is simulated, doesn't negate the fact that within the system that we're in, the cup is on the table objectively, and it can be confirmed by anyone other than me. And you don't have to take my word for it as long as you can observe the cup. You know what I mean? So that's one way I would address that. And you also say that science has no way of dealing with things that we know are objective, but there's no scientific basis. But you actually named things that are subjective, like beauty and right and wrong, and these things. There is no basis for the claim that they're actually objective. So I would like you to sort of justify that claim, and also measurement. Like, yeah, measurement, it's arbitrarily defined how long an inch is, but if you have 3 inches and we've already defined what an inch is, then something can be 3 inches. because we've defined what an inch is, and yeah, the inch itself is arbitrary, but it does like go over a certain specific amount of length that could be measured. Thus, we can say that something is 3 inches long. You know what I mean?
Sure. So, yeah, I think first let's address the I wanna make sure that I'm understanding you properly before I go on. So it sounds like what's being said is that because the philosophical framework, like the philosophy of science is present, that foundation is laid, further philosophy is comparatively unnecessary, roughly. Is that accurate, or would you have a way to kind of clarify that or correct any
I
misunderstanding
would
on my part?
I would say that philosophy is useful for many things even today, but it's not useful in the sense of like natural philosophy like it used to. So in the sense of finding objective truths about our reality, science has become something other than natural philosophy. It's transformed into a system that is no longer philosophical because you're no longer seeking wisdom and the abstract understanding of things. You're no longer trying to grapple with concepts and philosophize about them. You're trying to measure and verify that things work the way that is coherent with the actual reality we live in.
Okay. So I think this is where my confusion comes from. Because when I try to grapple with this, it seems to me that that statement in and of itself can't be scientifically proven. Like that
Okay, so
what you just said can't be scientifically proven, and that you are trying to guide the course of science in a way that it seems like you're treating as an objective matter of fact. Could you scientifically prove your statement to me?
so you want me to scientifically prove that science is a method that we've devised, which arose out of natural philosophy and grew to a point where it no longer fits the definition of philosophy and fits the definition of something separate from but derived from philosophy. You want me to scientifically prove that those are the definitions of those words, and that, essentially you want me to scientifically prove words, right?
Right, because the idea here is that the philosophy is now obsolete. Science can take over, right? Science should be the driving factor here in determining such objective truth, and philosophy's role again is a backseat. So why not try to scientifically prove things like the statement that science arose from natural philosophy
Because
and
science
this has
doesn't deal with
changed
the
and
abstract.
but are abstract subjective truths? Like,
No.
there's no possibility that any abstract, could be, say, an objective value or a
Nope, you
universalized
can't you
value?
can't prove objectively anything that's abstract. What you can do is you can say that if I knock over the table, then the table is knocked over on the floor. You can say that physical things happen within the limits of the physical system under which our perception of reality operates, but you can't say that a concept is objectively true, other than
Okay,
in the sense that it exists as a concept. But
okay,
you can say it logically is consistent with this or that system of logic, but you can't call it an objective truth.
okay, so, like, the Pythagorean theorem is not an objective truth in your view?
I would say that
Because
it
that's an
can
abstract.
it can be used to arrive at things that are objectively true. Logic can be used to arrive at conclusions that are objectively true, but logic is a like, it's a process basically that goes on in our minds. It's like partially physical, like if you're talking about logic and reason itself, it's partially physical and empirical and partially abstract because it's a process of our brains trying to analyze and find out what is true based on what actually makes sense, which may not be valid. What makes sense to us may just be subjective, but it could and can also lead to objective conclusions. It could lead to either one.
So, I guess my question would be, how would you arrive at the metaphysical claim that logic exists in this like material way, or where, say, the epistemic
We
claim
can
that the
look
logic
into
may
our
be
brains
untrustworthy?
and we can see chemicals and electricity flowing in various, trajectories and doing certain physical things which lead to basically the processes within our mind.
Sure. Like I understand that there's like the biochemistry with the brain, and I agree that biochemistry is something that occurs in our brain, and that the science indicates that. Where I struggle to connect that is that it seems that there's still a rhyme or reason. There still seems to be, say, a logical coherence of the universe. It seems like there's still universal principles out there that apply and extend beyond our understanding currently, maybe in many ways. And it seems like there's the thought itself that occurred. Like the idea that you can trust your own thoughts, for instance, or that you can even test your own thoughts, and that would give you an accurate view on reality. These are all philosophy problems that science still has to contend with today, and that science still leans on philosophers for. Like, there's a discipline of called philosophy of science that is modern and use. And some of the recent works that I've seen just browsing Phil papers, like just to give you a for instance, one thing was separating time and space, understanding that time is an aspect that is perceived, and the very nature of perception itself, when assessing, say, space time, means that we need to treat time differently than space in some significant ways, and that's something that could be arrived at philosophically. That would provide scientists an underlying assumption that now they can test against, and ultimately drive their activity in a certain direction. Like, that's bringing science to a bleeding edge. That would be the opposite of obsolete. That would be keeping science from being obsolete, in my view. You know what I mean? Like, that's kind of where I go. It's like I feel like we're trying to escape something inescapable.
That does make sense, but science, the belief in science is founded in philosophy essentially, because like the thought process that leads to science came from philosophy. But science itself is totally different from philosophy and more advanced than philosophy, specifically when it comes to actually knowing that what our conclusions are true. Because philosophy requires it requires the abstract, whereas science requires as much as possible to remove that. So anything in science that is philosophy is essentially a philosophy of reaching the next tier basically of philosophy. It's like creating a new thing that's better and more accurate than philosophy, where you no longer need to rely on feelings and opinions and ideology to have a conclusion. There's no it's a thing where there's no isms and there's only what you can by within the limits of the system in which it operates.
Yeah, so I guess this is my next question. Would you separate logic, like, so say I could come to a logical conclusion, like if you're familiar with any kind of like the basic arguments like modus ponens, right? If this, then this, therefore this, those types of things. If P, then Q. Um, and so, like, let's say that I talk about those. When I use those logical operators, or even if I fed them into a computer, that logic is still an abstract thing. It just happens to correspond perfectly with reality. Um, and so I think that, like, we can't escape those aspects of this, and that's where the confusion may be drawn in the support for this premise. If we run into issues where we see that the logic, upon extrapolation and upon developing our understanding of logic, independent of science, working through axioms and things of that nature, we can see maybe that certain conclusions are incorrect, and so we can actually use it to check our science for accuracy, which is another kind of bleeding edge use case. To give an example of this, we could say take a look at psychological studies, right? The science of psychology, um, and we could look at how many of these studies survived peer review from their scientist peers, but then were not repeatable, not and when repeated would come up with vastly different results than initially stated. I think that's a good opportunity for a philosopher of science to come in and say, hey, I think I've identified what's going on here, or potentially where to start checking for these hidden variables, because all of the scientists failed in this task. um, and the final note here, on this, that I just kind of throw your way, would be, oh shoot, I had it and I just lost it. Oh yeah, it's that science itself, uh, it can't really seem to tell me what's true. It can kind of tell me what's false, though. It seems like the scientific method is designed to throw stones at a hypothesis, not to tell me that the hypothesis is accurate, but just to tell me that it's not wrong. And that's different than being true. Or saying we're not able to prove this wrong yet doesn't mean that it's correct. And so it seems odd to say that science is giving us a source of objective truth when it's almost more like science is telling us what's not totally false, maybe, which
Well,
is different.
science doesn't give you something to believe in, and science doesn't give you something that's supposed to make sense to you. What science gives you is data drawn from observing the behavior of physical processes and systems. So
Sure.
we can apply logic to science, but the logic has to conform to the results also, because it's been proven many, many times that what we conceptualize as working doesn't actually work in reality. We've made philosophy obsolete many times, and we've made science itself obsolete to itself many times. You know what I mean?
Well,
Because we
that's where I'm trying to figure out what you mean. But yeah, like I feel like there might be a maybe like a perception issue, or maybe like because I feel like there's something behind this on, and this is where I'm trying to find common ground. And I think there's something behind it of, look, there's philosophical debate that goes on. And in philosophical debate, it seems like there's no agreement on a sense of objective facts, and that's an issue. Whereas in science, it's a lot easier to get a consensus because things are materially demonstrable, and in theory should be repeatable, and we can kind of all agree. Like, I don't disagree with that notion, but I don't think that's strictly speaking objective truth.
well, you know that logic would say that a truth can't be supported, and this goes into something that I learned of recently called the Munchausen trilemma. Truth basically can't be supported by itself, and logic, as we, the purely abstract logic, the only way to verify logic would be with itself. But if you rely on if you rely on empirical data to try and derive your logic, then it no longer really becomes logic. It then becomes a system which actually explains the behavior of things. So instead of a philosophical sense of like you could still call it logic, but instead of like the philosophical sense of logic, which is purely abstract, it then becomes a system which is still abstract in the sense that it exists conceptually, but actually explains reality. And I'm actually going to break what they call the Munchausen trilemma. I don't know if you're even familiar with that, but in
I'm not,
epistemology,
but if
I'm
you yeah.
reading I'm reading from the Wikipedia here. In epistemology, the Munchausen trilemma is a thought experiment used to demonstrate the impossibility of proving any truth, even in the fields of logic and mathematics. If it is asked how any given proposition is known to be true, proof may be provided, yet that same question can be asked of the proof and any subsequent proof. The Munchausen trilemma is that there are only three options when proving further proof, when providing further proof in response to further questioning. Number one is the circular argument, in which the proof of some proposition is supported only by that proposition. The regressive argument, in which proof requires a further proof ad infinitum, and the dogmatic argument, which rests on accepted precepts which are merely asserted rather than defended. Now, the fact that we exist as conscious entities is supposedly a circular argument because, you know, philosophically, there's the old saying, I think, therefore I am.
Mhm.
There's the concept that we know that we exist because we experience existence, which is said to be a circular argument where the proof of the proposition is supported only by that proposition. And I'm going to both break the Munchausen trilemma right now and prove that science is superior to philosophy in some sense. Using philosophy on the surface, it appears that way, but in reality, I'm using empiricism. So we have like three different levels we can break reality down into. We can call it no. We can call the first one nomenon, which is the essence of what a thing is in and of
Mhm.
itself. Like, and I'm gonna prove this after I say it, if you know what I mean. So I'm saying this without proof in the moment, but it's gonna be justified.
Are you referring to the, Kantian notion, like the nomenological and phenomenological world?
Yeah, but I'm just using it to refer to what is actually real beyond, like, I'm using it to refer to what is real beyond physics, specifically in the sense that physics is the behavior of nomenon. Nomenon is what's real, it's the essence of reality, and physics can be defined as the behavior of nomenon, or the properties of nomenon, how it interacts with itself, that being existence itself, what it does. Physics is in the middle, and that's also empiricism. It's basically in the same box. Physics and empiricism is what things do. Nomenon is what things are, and the abstract or conceptual or subjective is exactly what it is. It's the subjective abstract realm. It's what we sense. It's what we conceive of conceptually. And it would be argued, you know, that the observation of existence itself, or proving existence by basically having self-awareness, is actually based in pure subjectivity, but the subjectivity itself is actually misleading because it breaks the Munchausen trilemma by breaking the part where any argument supposedly can fall into three categories, and the circular reasoning argument specifically is the one that it breaks. Because when you have a subjective experience, when you think, therefore you are, you are failing completely in our level of consciousness to understand what nomenon is, but the act of not even the act, because it's not an act, but the fact that you are self-aware is the empirical observation that there is existence. And if there wasn't existence, then there would be no basis for you to experience absolutely anything. So the reason why it breaks this is because the subjective experience of existing is the empirical observation of nomenon, which is it transcends all three levels. So it goes from the abstract to the physical through that and into nomenon itself. Do you follow that?
I think so, but I do find it a bit interesting and odd that because I think that logically we don't need to invoke empiricism to verify all of these details. In fact, I think we're basically able to do it entirely a priori. And I'll give an example of that. So if I believe in say necessarily true things. So these are statements like these can be true by definition. And I think in this case, we can just leverage things that are necessarily true by definition. That way I can avoid circular arguments here. It seems like, for instance, a square has four corners is necessarily true. There's no world where a square does not have four corners. There's no possible configuration of reality where a square does not have four corners. We may use different language to refer to what a square is or whatever. The Chinese may have a different word for square than the Spanish, than the English, but a square as the concept itself, independent, has four corners. Um, so when I take something like that and I think of the concept I, and I think, and I immediately take think, right? So for cogito ergo sum here, as we've been discussing, it follows that I think, therefore I am, is almost it's defended by necessary truths. There are thoughts, and I am experiencing them. And I know this as evidence because there's no other alternative that's viable. There's no other possible world where I could have thoughts and not experience them. There's no other possible world where I could exist without thoughts to experience in this kind of sense, in like an identity sense. Um, and so I think that we could take these necessary truths and use those to kind of break this trifecta. And I think that's what you're trying to do with the nomenon. That's just discovering a principle that can't be false, um, in my view. And so I think you're just relying on deeper logic than like the surface level. I think you're relying on a different kind of truth that is always the case in all possible worlds in order to establish what you mean. And those kinds of issues get flushed out with more philosophy. So to bring this full circle. So I just to clarify that point, I think you resolved an epistemological problem with a bit of a priori deduction, some necessary truth, and a whole bunch of philosophy tools. Which I
No,
mean,
it was
you said it was
it
philosophy,
was empirical observation. That's what it was.
right?
I
But
empirically observed the fact that I exist, therefore existence exists.
right, and that also factors in like an a priori sense, like because let's say that there wasn't an existence in a quote unquote reality. Like let's say that the existence is some kind of hyper reality, some deviation of the simulacrum. Perhaps we're in the Matrix, or something Nick Bostrom-esque, right, or what have you, right? The fact that you experience the thoughts is still enough to justify your existence, even if we don't know functionally at all what either of those mean. Like we could still understand that that's happening. Right. So, like, all of the empirical observation could be entirely false and fabricated. Every thought could be false and fabricated, but you could still, right, see that. So I mean, there's a lot of like a priori going on there in the background that I think we're dismissing. And that's why I think like it's important to see like, yeah, like I don't disagree that empiricism has insanely high value to us in terms of like STEM, in terms of the practical application of things. But like also we have philosophers pioneering things like how much could we possibly theoretically simulate if we wanted to turn our world's computers into mass simulation software, or to verify the issue of if human beings are in a simulation. That's something Nick Bostrom's done. Same for big data and company marketing acquisitions. We have philosophers like driving like, hey, how should e-commerce work? And how can e-commerce and big data work together to maximize profits for companies? Philosophers are needed to make these kinds of things, and they can arrive at objective statements of facts um, through philosophy. They don't need to, strictly speaking, invoke science explicitly or by itself to do all of these things. So it's just like we're trying to describe, I think, like this idea that philosophy is now vestigial because we flushed out empiricism and can get a lot out of it. Um, Disregarding again that empiricism itself is a philosophy.
Well, physics is just as removed from noumenon as the abstract is removed from physics. But for us, it goes the other way. We have to start with the abstract and our senses, and then go to physics, and then go to noumenon. But that doesn't mean that the abstract is superior or more valid to empiricism, because when you try to raise the validity of the abstract logical, philosophical aspects of seeking truth, empiricism, the validity of that actually is raised with it. Because if you say that a square is always a square and a circle is always a circle, that just means that we have more, fundamentally correct assumptions that we can work on with which to begin the process of actually verifying what's true using empirical science.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's the point that I'm trying to make, is that as philosophy continues, it can provide these baseline assumptions that the traditional practice of the sciences require in order to function and explore more and falsify more and give us a better idea of reality. The philosophy of science is one of the big things really helping that. That's how we can get a lot of these assumptions, and how we can then start to formulate really strong hypotheses and continue to do that, and also how we can refine those methods over time. So, like improvements made to the scientific method, or to how we specifically apply the scientific method, the details and the nuance, in particular experiments and developments and things that we do, it helps inform that. That's what I'm driving to. So that's why I'm saying that it's a core component.
Yeah, and that makes sense, and that's fair to say, but at the same time, you don't actually need to believe in any abstract system in order to use science. Science is it functions to explain physical reality, not noumenon, not logic and emotions and art, but just raw physics. It functions to do that without any consideration of what makes sense to us as humans. So you don't need to believe you don't even need to believe the underlying assumptions of science in order to use science to arrive at truths. And
Well,
science, go
if I
on.
may, that's the same. That's the same is true of logic. The same is true of math. The same is true of grammar in English. Is something, you don't need to believe that that what you're doing is true. You can put in inputs and get outputs out of them. They're consistent systems. I don't. I think that's true of all of them.
Well, not necessarily, because in order for a system of an abstract system to work, it actually has to be based on empiricism, and empiricism has to be based on noumenon. because reality is based on noumenon. Physics is the behavior of noumenon, and the abstract is just derived from the physics in our head. You know what I mean? So for us, as a system of trying to understand reality, we start with abstract concepts, and I've demonstrated that we can go from that to valid, real empiricism and even truths about noumenon, even if the only truth that we can derive is that it exists. So the way that we think is backwards to the way that reality is. Physics is a basis for logic, not the other way around. And so empiricism is a closer, like, science is a closer system to what reality actually is than philosophy. You know what I mean?
Well, so I guess the question would be if the philosophy can has a much more difficult time corresponding to reality, you still arrived at all of this philosophically. Like you didn't arrive at that claim scientifically. I suppose you can make the argument that you drew empirical observations, and that's fine. Like you can say, look, from observation of the world in these systems, we're able to address this nomenon, the nomenon dilemma here with the and that could be fine. Like I don't think that I don't think that I honestly need to bother contesting that because I'm not disputing that empiricism can derive, like we can get a lot of value from our senses and observations and through tracking them in data and meticulous methodology, and I think that's useful. Where I see myself as a philosopher, down the line is being able to help scientists. That's kind of my stake in the game, and I think that uh, it discards again, like it's the discarding of the applications that a priori has for us, that modal logic has for us, for instance. It's discarding a whole series of these applications as though empiricism is simply taking those over, as though logic
Well,
was
no,
derived at
because
empirically, and I don't
those
I don't
could
know that that's
actually
true.
be useful. You know, like I never said those couldn't be useful. I think that philosophy will always be useful, but I don't think that it's always going to be the best thing that we can use to, in general, gain objective truths. I think that philosophy is removed from objective reality more than science is, because science is actually a study of the behavior of reality, even if it's limited to certain systems. Like, even if we're in a simulation or something and the physics that we observe is skewed, we can at least derive objective truths about how things work within that context. But
Sure.
philo- philosophy is something that is only relevant insofar as it relates to physics, and physics is only relevant insofar as it relates to noumenon.
So, gosh, I'm trying to think about like our roadblock here. I'm trying to think about just like a different way to address it because I think we're at a point where we're going to start hitting a brick wall. Um, and I'm trying. I really am trying to get past that the best that I can. I'm just um 'Ca the contention I'm trying to make sure that I'm, again, hearing what you're saying correctly. The contention is that this all kinda comes back to noumenon, which is verified independently in an empirical sense. It's not verified in a, rationalist, sense, but it can survive a rationalist critique.
Yep. So how that also relates to the Munchausen trilemma thing is that supposedly the idea that we exist would be the proof that we exist, if you know what I mean. But the idea is the observation, and that's like the only case where that would be the case. It's literally the only single thought experiment where noumenon physics or empiricism and the abstract actually merge into one, is self-awareness.
Okay. So I guess this would be my next question. Does more than the material world exist?
I don't know, because physics as I would define it at the most basic level is the behavior of reality, how things behave in reality, whichever way you want to put it. So
Does
to ask me if something beyond the physical exists, the physical isn't the thing. The physical is the behavior of the thing. You know what I mean?
sure. Does physics exist?
The fact that things do certain things, like those processes actually tangibly unfold within whatever system of reality under which we're operating. That's how I'd put it.
So because this is what I would contend. I would contend that the laws of physics, while observable, are not like any kind of tangible material thing, but they are very real.
Yeah,
And
the laws of physics themselves are a concept based upon the observation that things behave a certain way.
what if I investigate matters of physics entirely through mathematics and logical axioms? So if without regard to the
And you have no
to
way
the
of verifying whether
physical.
you're correct or not.
So is theoretical physics not a science to you?
Not really.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's an interesting concession. I would disagree. I think it's still a science. I think that it's still developing things that may be tested eventually, or that proving those things logically or mathematically is sufficient evidence to believe that's what's going on.
You could call it hypothetical physics then.
I mean, yeah, I suppose. I suppose it's the extrapolation of physics through pre-existing scientific theory and examining variables and testing different things through theory and using the theory to push to greater knowledge. But that seems like a hyper-developed, synthesized kind of abstract philosophy used to identify bleeding edge discoveries in the world of physics. So in my view, that would be the far from obsolete. That would be the bleeding edge. That would be the antithesis of the claim.
I'd ask you to elaborate on that then.
Yeah, like I mean, the theoretical physicist isn't relying strictly on empirical observation to do everything that they do. The empirical observation may be a part where they integrate some particular data points, which may or may not be accurate, but then they're going to put those through a series of analyses and tests and like say mathematical proofs and things of that nature to work on and develop equations that should predict reality accurately. And other times they may say just apply pre-existing laws that are quote unquote known objectively. And then they may apply those laws to get a further understanding of physics and how it applies to a case that cannot be tested, but where we can say that now we've deductively verified this and we know it to be true. So uh,
Yeah, they're like abstract systems that we use to do science. Science is full of that, but it's closer to physical reality than philosophy is. It surpassed philosophy in that sense. Philosophy can only find, like truths that are, are at most like connected to systems that are connected to physical reality, if that makes sense. Like economics, for example.
sure, like that we're aware of, yeah. Like they're like I don't suggest that I'm concerned with these things. There may be cause to be concerned with things that we have no idea um exist, like literally unknown unknowns, right? There could be plenty of reason to investigate those. And I don't dismiss people for doing that, but I also don't spend, my everyday thinking about those, right? Like what do we not know that we don't know? What is beyond the universe, for instance? I don't spend every waking day on those issues, but if I need to answer those questions, I can address those with philosophy. And I guess one thing that we could also go back to is the idea that that there aren't other forms of objective truth, like that beauty isn't an objective thing at all, or the existence of beauty is not objective. And that's something where some philosophers may disagree with you on. And further, like moral judgments, that certain moral judgments can't be objective. We could posit a system like utilitarianism, and then we could arrive at, say, under an act utilitarian system with a perfect computer, we would arrive at objective moral judgments every time. The deontologist, your Kants and Hegels of the world, you could arrive at an objective moral judgment using their systems every time. And those uh, objective truths of morality, if their systems are true, just like facts of the world, empirical facts of the world, if they lead us to scientific truths that, if true, can then be extrapolated on and used for other things. That's all useful. I don't think that we can just assert and say, well, or morality is not objective or beauty is not objective because people disagree. I don't think that the basis of what an objective truth is what people agree or disagree with. I think the objective truth is what is actually the case, what actually corresponds to reality as true. So, so I guess I just want to address an equivocation that disagreement doesn't indicate an absence of a truth value if reality is so truth apt, which I believe that it is.
The difference between philosophy and science, again, is that someone can look at an issue like morality and everyone can have a different opinion on it. But in science, assuming that everyone in the room understands the science, everyone is always going to agree on it.
Why would that not be the case for, like, say, logical arguments, though? Like, because
It's more the case for those, but those also are less universal.
but that's also the groundwork of philosophy. So, like, just because there's disagreement on these things, like, I'm not claiming that there's no disagreement on philosophical matters, but I think there's also plenty of disagreement on scientific matters. There's disagreement about the origins, specific age of the universe. Those are some examples. There's disagreements on evolutionary biology to the extent where appealing to evolutionary biology is softcore considered a logical fallacy in many circles. Because people just kind of posit things to say, oh, well, evolution would say that this beak being longer makes you better at getting seeds and such and such. And evolution, it seems odd to ascribe a motive to a natural system in such a way without further justification. And people have called that out. Like there's all kinds of things where scientists disagree with each other. And there's all kinds of things where sure philosophers disagree with each other. But on things like logical axioms or things like we shouldn't assault each other, or on things like there are things that we call beautiful in this world. Like these are objective truths that are present, and of course science itself is one of these truths. And I guess this is kind of just like the irony of the position. And returning to that notion, it's just that the position that science makes philosophy obsolete is ironically a claim that could only be produced philosophically. And that would be the claim that would be needed to make science, to define science as at the bleeding edge, as not obsolete, and and with philosophy as obsolete. But it hinges on philosophy at every aspect of its being to do that, and the philosophy still continues to refine it as it continues forward. They need to coexist as disciplines together. So I think you and I can agree. Like, we may disagree on the role philosophy plays in these discussions, but I think you and I agree on empiricism being really valuable, which I think is a good note for this conversation. And I think your affirmation of empiricism is noteworthy. Like it's important that we leverage that for sure. So I don't want to invalidate that. I think we just disagree on some of the minutia here in how philosophy will continue to impact science over time. And that, like, my belief is that philosophy is here to stay. Like, I don't think it's going anywhere. I don't think it's obsolete. And I think it's necessary. I don't know if you have anything you want to say in closing, but
Yeah, well, yeah, I do agree that philosophy is here to stay. Like I said, I don't think that philosophy is obsolete in the sense that it's useless or that it's going to be done away with. And I think, yeah, there are many things in science that are based in philosophy, but that doesn't negate that science hasn't rendered it obsolete in the sense that science is superior for deriving objective truths, because science is a more advanced version of natural philosophy, which is actually evolved to the point where it's no longer philosophy. So yeah, you can argue that it's based in philosophy and requires like philosophical conclusions to be drawn before scientific ones can even be drawn. But at the same time, like the fundamental conclusion of all that any sentient being can make, the fact that like existence even exists at all is like the proof that there's a way to still be a subjective human and remove your what you see in the world as from the realm of the subjective. And when it comes to purely philosophical concepts like beauty and morality, it will always be possible for everyone to have an opinion on those things, but it will never be possible for you to have an opinion about science unless you don't understand it. Therefore, it's more objective.
And I do want to say, by the way, I have really enjoyed this conversation, and thank you to Arthuria for hosting. This was fun because I wasn't actually expecting to see this topic ever. But I think I'm good on calling that, unless I think there's any other points that we need to make here. But I think that's a good time to call it.
Awesome. Are you all set on your end, Scornful?
Yep.
Okay, great. So I guess at this point we can decide on a voting poll, and then we can move to Q&A if that's cool with you guys, because we do have a couple questions from the Arthuria audience. So now we can pick between one of two voting polls. The first is a detailed voting poll where it picks from three criterion. First being a question of who had the better argumentation, second being who had the better rebuttals, and third being who had the better rhetoric, and the audience will vote on all three of those criterions and it will decide the winner. Or we could just go with the simple voting poll where it just simply asks who won, Walt or Scornful. So which voting poll would you guys like to use?
I'll defer.
We'll go with the 3 points then.
Okay, great. And I guess we'll go with the 3-question voting poll. So everyone here is eligible to vote except for Cyrus the Black because you weren't here for 75% of the debate. If everyone else could vote, I would really appreciate it. And now let's move on to the Q&A. We just have a couple questions. So the first one is from Uguay. He's no longer in the VC, but this question is directed at both of you, and he asks, is math a science?
My answer is no. Math is philosophy. Math is philosophy with numbers. Simply put. So I believe that logic is a philosophical discipline. I think that's justified pretty substantially. One of the first major philosophical works that we know of was Aristotle's Metaphysics, setting forth rules of logic. And of course, this is developed and continued through studies of logic today. So I don't find that controversial. Numbers are an abstract. They're an abstract that exists with a definitional purpose. You can't say that, say, the number 4 exists tangibly in the world, right? So easily. Although some philosophers may make those arguments. But in that sense, yeah, I see logical operators interacting with numbers that create other consistent outputs of numbers in a logical system with a logical syntax that could exist uh, independently of the material world, so long as we could think independently of the material world. Even if the material universe didn't exist, mathematics could still exist if our minds were a separate concept entirely. Um, I suppose if you aspire to some materialistic aspect of the mind and you want to go into some empirical critique of that position, probably the argument would be uh, that because the mind exists materially, then math is material in that sense that thought is material. To which, sure, if that's how the mind actually does work, and that's what we can actually prove and verify and test against, then I'm not worried about that. I'm not too worried about theory of mind stuff yet on this, but that's roughly my answer.
Yeah, that was a good answer, and my answer would basically be that yeah, mathematics is fundamentally more like abstract and philosophical in its roots. Like numbers are obviously an abstract concept, but at the same time, quantity is observable in physical reality. You can have three balls, and the quantity, the three balls are physically there. So the quantity of the balls, you could say, is physically there, but at the same time, the number three isn't necessarily physically there, or whatever algorithm you put into that doesn't necessarily correlate to reality. So it's like an abstract thing that can or cannot, depending on the context, be part of physical reality.
Yeah, and I guess there's also, I think if I could just add one more note, there's of course, the colloquial sense of math as a science or logic as a science, where we're saying that these are just consistent systems where we can apply consistent inputs, get consistent outputs, and that's not necessarily what being a quote unquote science means. Like science is referring to the study of the natural world, the study of the observable universe through uh, empirical means, the scientific method, etc. So that's a little bit different of a claim than like these things are consistent. But I can see where people would say, "Oh, math is a science colloquially," and that's not where I'm picking my fights on an everyday basis. So
Awesome. Thanks for the input. And the next question we have is actually directed towards Scornful, and the question's from Philosopholly. And he asks, where are you drawing your conception of noumena from? Is it from Kant? And if not, where are you pulling it from?
It's not necessarily from Kant, but I'm referring very broadly to the concept, or not the concept really, but just existence, just what is the fundamental, you know, the fundamental basis of everything that we can observe or conceptualize, which isn't a physical phenomenon or an abstraction, but is actually just the very essence of what existence is. It's just existence.
Gotcha. Thanks for that input. And the last question is directed towards you again, Scornful. And the question is from Cool Dog, and he asks, how, from only an experiment and with no philosophical input, can you infer the laws of quantum mechanics?
For me,
Yeah, that was for you, Scornful. I know it's a bit of a lengthy one, so I just copy and pasted in debate chat so you have something.
I almost want to answer that just as a charitable opponent. I don't think he's asserting that.
Would that be your answer too, Scornful?
I need to hear the question again. I'm not seeing it here.
Oh, no worries. I just pasted it in debate chat, but the question is, how, from only an experiment and with no philosophical input, can you infer the laws of quantum mechanics?
How, from only an experiment and with no physical input? Oh, philosophical, yeah. Only an experiment, no philosophical input. Can you infer the laws of quantum mechanics? I wouldn't say you necessarily can, like, because I don't necessarily believe that quantum mechanics is actually an accurate representation of the reality of what's going on. I think that quantum mechanics is actually the result of us trying to explain the parts of reality which we can't, you know, observe ourselves or rationalize. in any way. We're just defaulting to whatever the math says. That's what I think about quantum mechanics, is that we're just listening to whatever the math says because we don't know.
Gotcha. Thanks for that input. And in regards to the question that was prior to this one, the one about the conception of nomina and whether it's from Kant, Philosopholly actually wants to unmute and ask a follow-up question. Do you want to do that now, or would you prefer that in maybe Serious Saloon in like a post-debate discussion? It's up to you.
I'm cool either way.
Yeah, same here.
Okay, great. And let me just unmute you real quick, Philosopholly. Okay, you're all
I
good.
think I could actually myself. Okay, so the reason I was asking was because in Kantian philosophy, noumena is like aside from like sense data. So like I guess the way that you were talking about it like confused me. So like noumena would be like things that like the way the thing exists like away from like our ability to perceive it, right?
So there's existence, and then there's how things behave within existence, which also could just be how existence itself behaves, because everything within existence is part of existence. And then after that, there's the abstract. And what self-awareness is the physical process within the brain which leads to the ability to have subjective experience and abstractions. So we're able to cheat, but it's not really cheating, but we're able to cheat because in a sense, because we are abstractly conceptualizing and imagining inside of our subjective experience the objective empirical fact that we exist, and thus everything else, not everything else, not anything that we observe necessarily, but that existence exists.
Well, yeah. So like the noumena is like things that you don't perceive, right? Like the phenomenal world is what, like, I guess science, like at least in Kant's view, would like be concerned with, because that has to do with like sense data, things that we're able to perceive, and the way we're able to interact with other objects. Whereas the noumena is like something separate, which is why like I was curious, because I'm just like the way you were talking about it just kind of tripped me up, I guess.
Yeah,
The
well,
cool things.
there may be like things that I don't fully understand about Kant's, what his whole idea behind the thing was, but I'm just using like it as a placeholder word just to say, what is underlying physics itself, but it is separate in the sense that it's not, phenomena. It is separate from phenomena because it isn't phenomena, but it's attached to phenomena, because what would be doing if there wasn't a nomenon? There would be doing, but there wouldn't be a thing to be doing what is being done. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You
Okay.
do.
Yeah. I just wanted to clarify that you were like not using that version, like not using the Kantian conception of that word, because it seems to be distinct from that. So that's all. That's all I wanted to like clarify, I guess. Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, and actually, I was going to say if you did ever see the Kantian notion there for Kant's definition of the nomenological and the phenomenological worlds, things that are transcendent. So in his view, the synthetic a priori, that's where we're going to generate a notion of an objective morality from reason alone. Um, um, Effectively, I mean, it's going to be reason interacting with experience and to an extent, and we can of course make different arguments for different categorizations and such. But basically, the idea is that logic would ultimately dictate through that same kind of transcendental property I think you're describing with defeating the Munchausen's dilemma. That same kind of property is going to be where you can derive objective moral principle from, according to Kant's metaethics. And so there's some kind of fascinating things there that you can play with and what have you, which could be an interesting discussion for another time.
Yeah.
All right, awesome. Well, that's it for the questions. I just want to real quick thank both of you for taking the time to debate on here, and thank you to the audience for tuning in, of course. So now I'm going to move everyone to serious saloon. I just want to let you know, Walt, because I know you're streaming, so I didn't know if you wanted to come along or do your own thing with your stream.
For sure. I'll drop to answer some stream questions real quick, and then I think I'll jump into the chat once I cut the stream.